All right. So Jimmy is a Bitcoin programmer by trade. He's a prolific author. He's written Programming Bitcoin, Solo, published by O'Reilly. And he's teamed up on Thank God for Bitcoin, Bitcoin and the American Dream, the Little Bitcoin book. He's also working on a new book, which we'll get into. And, for those of you who did not know, Jimmy is an Austin local, but he's spent the last 9 months traveling the entire world with his entire family, which I think he's probably most proud of over all the other things that he's done in the world of Bitcoin, certainly. And so tonight we'll talk a lot about this idea of monetary independence, but we'll dive into that, launching off from talking about Jimmy's new book and his world travels and his experiences with his family. So first, Jimmy, could you tell us what the title of your new book is and the core focus of it?
Well, first of all, thank you guys for coming out. I did not expect this many people, to be honest. And, many of you have come up to me and, told me that you've been reading my stuff and watching my content. So thank you so much. It really does mean something to know that people are listening or reading or consuming some of the content that I'm creating. The book that I've been working on for the last year is Fiat Ruins Everything. That is the name of the book. And the more I think about it, the more I think it's true. It really does ruin absolutely everything. And the book has many chapters. I submitted a revision to my editors today, and it has 33 chapters. And there are so many different ways in which fiat just ruins something. So I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that. But this book is sort of like a culmination of something that I've been thinking about ever since I got into Bitcoin. Why is Bitcoin so radical? Because on the surface, it's this thing. It's this, like a better form of money. But the more you investigate it, the deeper down the rabbit hole you go down, the more you realize it affects way more than just, quick payment here or something like that. And that's what this book is really an exploration of. And the big aha moment for me was realizing it's not that Bitcoin is so special. It's just that fiat is just so corrupt. And it's the removal of fiat that gives us all of these good things that Bitcoin adds. It's really getting out of this sort of dirty, murky water that we've been swimming in, and we don't really even notice some of the oddities that, from a historical perspective, are actually very strange. And that's what this book is about.
Okay, can you dive into that? The idea that just how corrupt fiat money is, and if you were to talk about the most foundational reason why, could you unpackage that a bit?
Yeah. So the way I think about it is we shouldn't be asking stuff like, okay, well, a lot of Bitcoiners, they're getting into, eating healthier, exercising, having children, getting married, having families, like starting businesses, doing things that they love. Like, that shouldn't be the question. The real question is sort of flipping it around and saying, okay, why are people in the fiat world not having babies? Why are people in the fiat world so miserable and depressed? Why are people in the fiat world like going through all kinds of just misery in all kinds of ways? And the more you investigate, the more you realize fiat money is a system of corruption. And it corrupts just absolutely everything that it touches. So I'll give you an example of how this sort of works. I visited South Korea as one of the stops on my trip. And I was born there. I immigrated to the States when I was 8. So it holds sort of like a nostalgic place for me, and not to mention that I have a lot of relatives there. But one of the things about South Korea is that it has an insanely low fertility rate. So for every woman currently in Korea, you're getting about 0.78 babies. You need a fertility rate of about 2.1 to just sustain the population. Right now, it's at 0.78. In the city of Seoul, it's even worse. It's 0.59. And if you calculate that out, that means for every 100 great-grandparents, you end up with about 6 kids. That is what you would call a demographic death, right? Like it's a black hole. They're not going to recover. So I've been thinking about this and trying to figure out what's going on. How, because at least when I was growing up there, you know, lots of people had babies, and it was normal to have 3, 4 children or whatever. Right now, you're lucky if you only have 1. But the more I investigated and talked to the people there, I realized, okay, first of all, every family that has a child, both parents are working. So no brainer right there. If you have both parents working, you're really not going to have more than 2 kids, right? Like it's just it's unaffordable. It's not going to happen. And then you look at the real estate prices, and they are through the roof. In fact, almost everyone there that buys a home need their parents' help to buy it. So if you don't have a home, if you're sort of like renting a place, that also means that you're not going to expand your family, right? Even if you're one of the lucky few where you have one parent working and the other staying at home and taking care of kids, well, you're maybe not even going to be able to afford a place where you can have more than 2 kids. So how did that happen? Well, it's because of the fiat monetary system. Why does everyone need to work? Well, because there's a bureaucracy, there's rent seeking, and all of this money is being stolen away. So people have to work harder just to make their ends meet. And why is real estate going up? It's because of fiat money, because there's no good store of values. So people put their money in real estate instead, meaning that it's become an investment vehicle. So it goes to the people that want to hold it for its value appreciation rather than its utility. That means that it doesn't go to the people that want to have 3 or 4 kids. It goes to the person that just wants a bigger house so they can make sure that they keep the money that they already have and not lose it to inflation. And this is sort of like a pervasive pattern all over society. It's really fiat money that has caused all kinds of corruption. And you know, historically, like anywhere you had the amount of food that we have, like the healthcare that we have, and so on, you would have lots and lots of babies. But you don't in this system. Why? Because we're all kind of enslaved to the fiat system, aren't we? And that's really at the heart of the dysfunction that we see all over society today.
So a big part of your book, unless it's changed wildly in the past month, one of the things that Jimmy did a service for me on was sometime, I think in January, he reached out to see if I'd be his book accountability partner, and I was helped more so than I think I helped Jimmy, but we would schedule calls every Tuesday while he was jumping from country to country. And we would set milestones, and I think one of the and it was that actually probably my book wouldn't have gotten done, and I think hopefully I helped accelerate yours. But at that time, at least before you submitted to the editors, a big part of this was about incentives and how you think about incentives at different layers of society. So could you talk about kind of what those different incentive layers are, or how you think about them? And if you could just also talk a little bit about, you don't have to go through each one, but maybe pick out one to dive into kind of the next layer down of how it may impact an individual or a country or a company or a community.
Yeah, so I had some trouble sort of like framing this book, and I went through several before I settled on this one, which is incentives at various levels. And this is kind of based on a talk that I gave at BitBlock Boom maybe like 2 years ago or something like that. But the idea is that there are different levels at which we kind of operate. So there's the individual level, right? Like what incentives you have at the individual level. And the most obvious thing at the individual level is that there's no good savings vehicle. How do you save under a fiat system? What do you do? And you end up spending an extraordinary amount of time trying to find a place for your money that won't get debased, right? And especially if you're rich. If you're poor or whatever and don't have any money, you don't have to worry about that. Instead, you have to worry about the other side of the equation, debt. But on the savings side, it's a whole full-time job. In fact, if you know really rich people, they have entire family offices, right? They all they do is invest your money for you. That's all they do. And you have to pay them and like keep up with them. And if you give your money to like a venture capital firm or something like that, they take their 2 and 20, right? The 2% management fee per year and the 20% of whatever profits they make off of your money and so on. There's no savings vehicle. So all of these things sort of get incentivized. And that's at the very base at the individual level. But that's not the only thing it affects. It also affects relationships. It affects how we work. It affects our morals. It affects our beliefs or our dreams and how we pursue certain things, because the fiat monetary system incentivizes certain things. They can say, okay, if you go do this, then you'll make more money than you do this. Fiat money has this power to pick winners and losers instead of the market in terms of what sort of professions that you go into. And this is why vast majority of people in this room probably have a W-2 job, right? Because if you have a W-2, guess what? It's much easier to get a mortgage. It's much easier to get credit cards. It's much easier to get all kinds of loans. And this access to capital is kind of what chains you to it. I was talking to somebody earlier about the trip that I just went on for 9 months with my family, and I was like, it's a shame that people don't get to do this, because in a sense, like this is historically abnormal. There were always people that were traveling for a year and doing things, and then coming back and having a fresh perspective on their hometown after sort of traveling and stuff. The original 7 Wonders of the World was a guide. It was basically like a tourist guide. Here are the places that you got to go visit, right? And that was the original purpose of it. So even back then, when it was like very difficult to travel and it would take you months to go from place to place, this was something that people did. But most people can't do that. Why? Because they're chained and enslaved to a W-2 job. You can't just leave, right? You don't have that option. And unless you have an enormous amount of savings, that's not going to happen. And even if you do have that savings, well, guess what? It's debasing. So you have to constantly think about where to put the money and so on. And so that's the individual level. And then and there are many other things, especially around family and marriage, which I've already talked a little bit about. But the level above that is sort of the company level. And this is historically very unusual, because we were usually grouped into tribes and families and clans and things like that. Now it's whatever company you belong to. Think about it. Like when you meet someone, what's sort of the first question you ask? What do you do for work? Right? That's how we identify ourselves, is with the companies that we're at, instead of who we are as human beings, right? Like, I'm part of this family, I'm part of this tribe, I'm part of this a group of other people. And that also comes from fiat money. Fiat money has essentially made companies enormously important. It's sort of like this fiat substitute for what community should be. And that's essentially what's happened at that level. Then we can go a level higher, and that's a nation state level. And fiat money has completely corrupted the nation state level. If you study history, nation states actually didn't have that much power over their people. It's only really in the 20th century that we had something like a totalitarian surveillance state or a police state or something like that.
study history, like most people were left alone. It was very rare to have, internment camps or even prisons or something like that. It was largely the role of government was to make sure, provide certain services that otherwise couldn't be done, right? Like defense or something like that. Instead, we've come into a period of time where the state has all kinds of control, and it's, again, historically very abnormal. It's very strange, and they have this power because they have the power of money printing. They have this ability to essentially use pseudo market forces to incentivize you to do pretty much anything. I don't know if you guys remember earlier on during like the vaccination stuff, they had like lotteries, right? They were like, oh, if you get a shot, you get it like a lottery ticket, and you might win like $100,000 or something like that. Like they have these means because the money has no opportunity cost. And finally, at the highest level is the global level, and the global level is currently dominated by the dollar. And there's a reason why the U.S. absolutely dominates world discourse. In any conflict around the world, you see the U.S. straight in the middle of it. Why? Because they're a third party. Their money is the third party, and it's the dollar's role that causes us to be in strange conflicts like the Ukraine or Vietnam, right? Like, what the heck does that have to do with us? How did we get embroiled in like wars in the Middle East? It's because we're the implied third party because we control the money. The world is under dollar hegemony. So at all of these levels, there are sort of historically abnormal things happening, and it's almost all very dark and terrible, and leads to sort of like bad outcomes in so many ways. Now, I'm not going to say that it's all bad. There are certain good things. We have Pax Americana, right? We've had mostly peace within countries that are within our orbit, something like that. Although, you ask anyone in the Middle East and they'll like go, give you the middle finger or something like that. But there are certain benefits, but it comes at a cost. And it's these trade-offs where we have entire, industries of rent seeking. The U.S. is mostly a rent-seeking nation at this point. We don't produce very much. Almost all of that production has gone to China. Why? Because of the Cantillon effect. If you study Richard Cantillon, one of the things he predicted is, when the money-producing country, all of the jobs leave, all of the manufacturing leaves because labor is cheaper elsewhere, and that's exactly what's happened. They've gone further and further away. To the point where, nobody really produces things in America unless you do it at like a significant loss or the government subsidizes it or something. And that's the situation we have, and it's something that I want to point out with this book. I want to make clear with this book, and sort of give voice to that feeling that you've felt all your life, that something is just drastically wrong. Something is just off, and the things don't work the way they ought to, and it's this sort of almost dread that doesn't really have a name. It's fiat debasement. It's in everything that we've seen, and that's what this book is about.
I think one of the themes is that, and I'll shift it to Bitcoin for a moment, but most people don't know that there's a problem. I would say maybe, overwhelmingly the people in this room do, but particularly people who might be new tonight, that it's difficult to see why or how Bitcoin could be a solution if you're looking at it as a solution in search of a problem. But on my own journey to Bitcoin, I'd first figured out not necessarily the moral problems and the way that the dollar has broken incentives But I figured out that the dollar had a problem, that they were going to print it ad infinitum, and that eventually the dollar would fail. That it's no different than the Venezuelan bolivar. And I came at Bitcoin from the perspective of I've got a problem, and that made seeing Bitcoin as a solution easier. How does Bitcoin change the incentive to help this whole broken incentive structure heal, and how do morals fit in?
Yeah, so the current system is dominated essentially by the money printer, right? If you think about the flow of money, essentially you can think of every person as sort of nodes on a graph and sort of edges the relationships, something like that. And in a sound money system, like I pay you for something, you pay me for something, it's not getting inflated, and we trade goods and services. Everyone is better off. Every trade that you make because what you're getting is more valuable than what you're giving away. So everyone sort of like grows together as a civilization. Once you have a node in the network that is able to print money at will, well, then everything kind of gets infected as a result. So what we see in the fiat economy is that the money production business dominates, and in the United States, this is obvious. Like somebody mentioned BlackRock earlier. Why do they have so much power? Well, they're an investment bank, and they have access to shadow banking, which means that they can get 100x leverage. And what does 100x leverage actually mean? Well, the closest sort of like analogy that may be familiar to you is getting a mortgage. Do you pay for the entire house when you buy it? Usually no. You pay 20%. So you're getting 5x leverage. The rest of the 80% gets financed, and you get access to that money. Now, a company like BlackRock, they're able to get 100x, 1000x on their money, especially on something like foreign exchange stuff. That means that they can pump in money and take out money, whatever. They have enormous power over everything else. This is why they dominate. When you have this ability to print money, it just dominates everything, and it eventually infects everybody. Like one of the things that I point out in the book is that the orphan in North Korea, one of the most isolated countries in the world, like they're affected by the U.S. dollar. How? Well, in the black markets in Korea, the most desirable currency is the U.S. dollar. So when the dollar debases, guess who's getting screwed? It's the orphan in North Korea that wants to buy some rice so they can live another day. Right? That's who it's affect. It affects everybody, and this is the monetary network that gets absolutely corrupted by fiat money. And right now, we are in a situation where the U.S. dominates all of this stuff with the dollar hegemony. And we like, how does Bitcoin fix it? It takes that away. Takes that away. So once you don't have this dominant node, right? And it's to be very clear, this is very artificial. It was decided by a bunch of bureaucrats. If you can take that away, if there is an alternative that's decentralized, where we do things on our own and just sort of ignore that other currency, well, then things start to heal almost automatically. Because prices now reflect actual demand by people and not by the money printer. Because almost all prices right now have to some degree been affected by the money printer. So the government favors mortgages or prescription drugs or military spending or something like that. Those things have an artificially high price. Or if the government subsidizes something else, then that might have an artificially low price. Prices are the signal for people to figure out what they can do to contribute value to society. Right now, that's all screwed up. Instead, most people are, to some degree, serving the government through what I call rent seeking. You're doing something that doesn't add value, but you're still getting paid for it because there's a money printer that's able to fund your activities. And some people call that like bullshit jobs or something like that. But this is the pervasiveness of fiat money. It just infects absolutely everything.
Now I want to use that to shift to the trip, because you went to how many countries?
34.
34 countries over 9 months with your wife and 6 kids.
That's correct.
So first, I'll ask a question and then we'll jump back to the prior subject. But just tell us a little bit about that experience, having your family on the road, writing a book on the road, teaching your kids on the road. Maybe they were just taught by the experience of being on the road, but share just, kind of your general thoughts of now being back in Austin, of having been able to experience that with your family.
Yeah. So let me tell you why I did it. All of you have been alive for at least 3 years. So you know what happened in March of 2020, right? Where the entire world basically shut down. And if you know anything about me, you know that I like going to other places. I like experiencing new things. And one of the things that the pandemic taught me was that, the world's not going to be this open forever. And there's going to be probably a multipolar world at some point. My sort of American privilege that I have as a citizen isn't going to last forever. And so once we had the opportunity, we were determined to go visit some of these countries. And some of them were already closed, right? Like there's no way I'm getting into Russia at all. And that's a significant swath of the world. There's, I wasn't going to go into China for any reason, just because I might get trapped there or something like that. And that's another huge part of the world. So for me, this trip was sort of taken opportunistically, partly because it was a Bitcoin bear market. So it's like, go do something productive during that time. But the world wasn't going to be open forever. And so I wanted to have this experience with my family. Also, out of my 6 kids, my oldest is now 16. So wanted to spend more time with my kids. The other thing that happened during the pandemic, which started to sort of scare me as a parent, was just sort of the complete indoctrination that my kids were getting subject to, particularly as a Christian, around some of this transgender stuff. And it was frankly just sort of, I wanted to get them out of school. I wanted to be more of an influence on them. And this was a good way to reconnect with my children and my wife, and as a family, sort of really bond and make sure that I can pass down some of my values to them. Like visiting a lot of these countries in that sense was a little bit secondary. I wanted to spend a lot of time with my family, and I wanted to make sure that I lived out the values that I had, instead of sort of letting the fiat world sort of dictate what I can or can't do. I decided to sort of take control of my destiny and go. Now, I'm not going to say it was cheap or easy. It wasn't, but it was really, really fun and really, really interesting. And there were so many places that I got to go see, so many experiences that I got to have with my kids that I don't think I'll ever forget. I don't think they'll ever forget. The interesting thing was, like, when we started telling some of our friends our plans, like people sort of came out of the woodwork telling us, oh yeah, we did that thing like a few years ago, or and it would be a family with 4 kids. Oh, we did this thing, and went all over. I didn't even know anyone did this, but there were at least 5 families that we heard about, and a few that we met with, to sort of just give us advice. Hey, like, you should do this, and like, I'll give you one tip if you ever plan on doing this as a family. In any city, you can find an H&M. Go find a hotel near H&M, because they always have a store where it's safe. So you're always going to be okay if you have a hotel near H&M. Just a quick travel tip. So little things like that you learn, and you go all over the place and show them things. And it was a great way for me to connect, not just with my family, but with my faith. Right, like, we spent 5 weeks in Rome. We spent 3 weeks in Palestine and Israel. We went to holy sites in both those places, plus Jordan, plus Lebanon, plus Egypt. It was for us a very, it was meant to be sort of like this very meaningful year, and that's honestly what it ended up becoming.
All right, so I'm sure, well, you might not give me your best estimate on this. 34 countries. He did fail. He did not hit all 7 continents. He had some dream of getting to Antarctica, but that was, the Bitcoin price was down a little bit at that point. But 34 countries. How many Bitcoin conferences or meetups do you think you went to?
I think I went to one in about 2/3 of them. So I started in Latvia, because that was where Baltic Honey Badger was. The next country was Austria, and I went to bconf.de, which I didn't even know existed, but it's the largest German-speaking Bitcoin-only conference, and it's enormous. In fact, I think I was one of 3 English speakers. Everyone else spoke German, and the other 2 were Safety and Michael Saylor, and both of them spoke like through video conference. So I was the only live person speaking in English. That was another one. Switzerland, I went to Lugano Plan B Forum. Brazil, I went to the Lightning Conference there. Went to La BitConf in Argentina. And I started to do meetups starting in Lebanon, where, Jordan, where there were some Bitcoiners there. Lebanon, lots of Bitcoiners there, which makes sense because they're in hyperinflation. Turkey, Georgia, Dubai, or UAE. Met some people in Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and New Zealand. Yeah, so all those places I met somebody. I don't know how many that was, but that's probably around 20-ish. Yeah, somewhere in there.
All right. How many, this is going to sound off, but how many of those countries did people accept dollars? And how many did you at least see or experience people using Bitcoin?
Yeah. So using Bitcoin in what sense, though, right? Like, because most people don't use it as sort of like a day-to-day currency. Most people use it as a savings vehicle or a remittance vehicle. So one of the striking things was when I landed in Tbilisi, Georgia, and on the ride to the hotel, we saw like 2 or 3 stores with the Bitcoin logo. I'm like, what the heck is that? What's going on here? And I found out later from the local people there that a lot of people from Russia had come into Georgia because of the war in Ukraine. And they wanted to send money home, and Bitcoin was the way to do it. So all these sort of like places sort of popped up. And they said it hasn't been that long. It's only been 6 months where these stores like are there, so you can send money home, right? This was their sort of remittance rail because Russia is completely cut off from the SEPA or the
Swift
network. So that that was like one of the ways in which people use it. Most places will take the dollar, and this is something that I realized about hyperinflation in a lot of these countries is the dollar is your backstop, and the dollar is what sort of prevents the squeezing of any more Cantillon juice out of more money printing. This is that, by the way, isn't from me. That's from Safety. And I was visiting him in Beirut when he was explaining to me sort of like the mechanics of what was happening. As you know, they're undergoing hyperinflation. And 3 years ago, it was about 1,500 Lebanese lira to $1. The day I arrived there, which was in January, it was 44,000 lira to $1. I stayed there 1 week. The day I left, it was 49,000 Lebanese lira to $1. Last I checked, it's about 98,000 Lebanese lira to $1. So this is a pretty big problem. So what is going on? Well, if you go to Lebanon, you find that most merchants will take the dollar, and they prefer to for a good reason. And it's not what you might think. See, the highest denomination bill for the Lebanese lira is 100,000. So when I got there, it was worth about $2. So if you want to pay for anything, like, you know, a meal or something, and, you know, I have a big family. So if you're paying for a meal, it's, you know, a stack of bills this big, and, you know, you have to count it again. Everybody has money counting machines, right? Like that's just like a standard fare at every place. And they and you have to pay for it with cash, because no one's going to take a credit card. Who's going to wait 31 days in an environment where you're depreciating 10% in a week? So no one takes it. So everything has to be done in cash, including Uber, which was interesting, because Uber used to take credit card, but because of the hyperinflation, it's all cash. So in the app, it just says pay the driver in cash. And what's even worse is that because of the inflation, like Uber hasn't kept up the prices well enough. And so like almost every ride is like $1.50. Like, doesn't matter, you know, where you go within Lebanon or within Beirut, it's like $1.50, whether it's like 20 minutes or whatever. So what the drivers end up doing is they'll accept the ride and then they'll message you right away. It's like, you know, can you pay a little more, right? They're trying to get, because $1.50 is just, they're like, this barely gonna cover the gas. Like, what, can you pay a little more? So there's this like alternate negotiation. So all kinds of things just kind of break. Now, what's actually happening there is that a significant percentage of the Lebanese working population is employed by the government. And the government there is in charge of the electricity. So one of the things that I noticed is that street lights are on maybe an hour a day. So it's dark almost everywhere you go at night, because the lights just aren't on, right? Except for maybe an hour at some point during the day. That tells you kind of what happens when you have government cronies running these things. But what's happened there is that all these civil servants, as the currency is inflating, demand raises. And the politicians, knowing where their power base is, well, they give them raises, right? What happens with that money? Well, that goes into the economy, inflating the price of everything else. Now they need another raise because they can't afford any of this. So they've done like multiple rounds of this, where it's happened like 5 or 6 times, and each time it's caused inflation. It's to the point where now the market is anticipating the inflation, and that's how you enter hyperinflation. The thing is, everyone uses the dollar now, so it's more or less become dollarized. The bills just aren't large enough. And I found out that central banks are loath to print bigger dollar bills. It's kind of like doing a reverse stock split in the stock market. Like, it just sends the wrong signal if you keep printing bigger bills. So just like everyone in Lebanon has like, you know, guys too. They have like these like big fanny packs or whatever, and that's where they keep the currency, just big huge stacks. But the cycle of hyperinflation happens, and at a certain point, like the market anticipates it so well that the government doesn't get any benefit from printing more money. This is where the Cantillon juice just stops. You're trying to squeeze blood from a stone at that point. You can't do it. And this is, at least as Saif explained to me, why he's more optimistic about Lebanon at this point. Because in a sense, they've run out of sort of like the squeeze that they could put into from their citizens. And in that sense, the dollar is sort of like the refuge currency. It's a way to get out from under the control of your local government. What they don't realize yet, and I don't think they've really thought this through, is that they are just as now subject to U.S. dollar squeezing. The U.S. has the ability to squeeze the entire world, right, through its Cantillon games. And when it expands, there's a lot that can absorb it. But this is where, you know, things kind of get tricky, because we're going towards a bipolar world where you have NATO on one side and BRICS on the other. That this could mean some of this sort of like places where the dollar spreads isn't there anymore, especially if we start doing some of the same stupid policies that were in Lebanon. You know, if we have something like UBI or give public servants raises and things like that, the same thing would happen. It would probably take longer, but the same thing would happen.
So one thing, and I asked that specifically about how many countries accept the dollar, because I think one of the hardest things, and for all the Bitcoiners in the room, figure this out for people who are new, one of the hardest things to parse through is there's a world of 1,000 cryptocurrencies. This is the Bitcoin Commons. We only talk, we only work on Bitcoin. We only talk about Bitcoin here. And it's ultimately because Bitcoin is ultimately the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that could possibly be the solution. And I talk about the dollar being accepted everywhere because it's not a coincidence that if you go to Lebanon, they're not taking Argentine pesos. Money converges to one common medium because of the function of money. And in these local currencies, escaping to the dollar is clearly the best thing because their currency is collapsing more than the dollar, and they can't observe the relative change of the dollar because it's just stronger than the Turkish lira or the Lebanese pound or the Argentine peso. The mistake that people make is not making the connection that the same thing that's happened to those has happened to the dollar. People now are clearly feeling inflation in the United States, not to the same degree that you observed just in your weakened countries or what those people are living through. And I think the other thing that I take away from it is if there's a form of money that's working, things fail less badly than if it weren't. And that likely the way that the entire world hyperinflates, the Bitcoin is rapidly adopted because it's the only form of money that's holding its value. And people will start to adopt a new form of money when they absolutely have to. I do want to, there was one other explanation, because when we talk about Lebanon, as people can think of it as a one-off, but you experienced something very similar in Argentina.
Yeah,
right?
and Argentina is sort of like a basket case in terms of inflation. So similar thing there. When I arrived in Argentina, the day I arrived, I changed some dollars for pesos, and I got 284 pesos to $1. I was there 3 weeks. The day I left, I converted some of the pesos I had back to dollars, and I got a rate of 315. So 10%, 3 weeks, not quite as bad as 10% in 1 week, but that's sort of like the level that they're at. The thing about Argentina is that it's a country that's had sort of like persistent inflation problems for a very long time, and you could kind of tell because you go to all of these tourist places in Buenos Aires, and there are people just sitting out on the street with a wad of local currency saying "cambio, cambio." I change. they want dollars. They're hoping to get some kind tourists to exchange their money for dollars, because there are two rates in Argentina. There's the official rate and there's the blue market rate. The official rate is what the government publishes, and it's a rate that no one gets. Or when I was there, it was around 160. So it was roughly half of what you would get. And if you use credit cards in Argentina, that's the rate you get. But if you use cash, it's 300-ish or something like that. So all of these people don't want this currency. And the ironic thing is, these people should be switching their currency for Bitcoin. In fact, there's a whole network of people there. A guy that I could text on WhatsApp, and he would come over to me with a backpack of bills, but because again in Argentina their largest bill is 1,000 pesos, which was worth about $3. You have these giant backpacks, and sometimes they would run out of the largest one, so I would have to take the 500s, which are worth $1.50, right? And that's what I would have to use. And again, every place has a money counting machine. That was like a thing. So these people should be getting into Bitcoin. Like, this would be a much, much better savings thing. But they're not quite there yet because of this sort of confusion. The conference I went to is kind of a case in point. I don't know if you got to watch the debate I had with Vitalik on stage, but that was that conference where they were sort of confusing the issue and making it seem like all of these other things were similar to Bitcoin. It's not. It never has been. And the Argentinian government is sort of continues on this grift, and it's not just a currency. They're pretty blatant about a lot of other things. If you try to buy an Apple product in Argentina, it costs triple. Right? A lot of the people they figure it out. Okay, if you want a MacBook, it's cheaper to fly to Miami, buy the MacBook, and fly back than to buy it locally. But that's sort of like the tariff system that they have. They're essentially stealing from their own people. And Argentina isn't the only one. In Turkey, I saw this too, right? Where they were having significant problems. Egypt was just starting to have divergent official and black market rates. So the Bitcoin guy that exchanged some money for me. By the way, there's Bitcoiners everywhere. You can just ask me if you want to go travel somewhere and not have to worry about exchanging Bitcoin. There are literally meetup groups in every city, and they'll come over to your house and change it, or meet you at a police station, whatever you want. There's a lot of them. But this guy, so I saw that it was something like 31.5 Egyptian pounds to $1, and I was like, okay, yeah, so can I get 1,000 or something like that? And he was like, okay, yeah, here you go. So how much do I owe you? Well, I'll give you 32.5. I'm like, why are you doing that? Oh, I guess you don't know, but the black market rate's 33. So there's already sort of a spread. And that sort of works its way into the economy as people demand dollars way more than the local currency. And this happens all over the place. The one interesting place was Georgia, and they actually strengthened against the dollar. So about a year ago, they were at 3.5 Georgian lari to $1. When I was there, it was 2.6. So why did they strengthen? Well, it turns out all those Russian refugees brought a lot of money, and there was more demand for the Georgian lari because they were in there. So it varies to some degree, but even the people in Georgia, they all know that that their local currency is not that great, because they've just within the lifetime of the Bitcoiners I met there have been 2 complete currency debasements where they switch currencies, right? And they're like, okay, yeah, I understand, and this is why we're into Bitcoin.
All right, so fiat money ruins everything. Fiat money is collapsing everywhere. There are Bitcoiners everywhere, and the world's going to be a lot simpler when you can just go to 34 countries with your 6 kids and just pay in Bitcoin without having to deal with 34 local currencies and different exchange rates depending on whether you're dealing in the black market or the official market. Let's give Jimmy a hand. And I know it's warm in here, but we'll open it up for just a couple questions and then we'll get back to talking.
Yeah, there's one here.
Jimmy, just be honest. The real reason you went on this big long trip is because you're jealous of Tone Vei's perpetual traveler lifestyle.
Well, interestingly enough, I met Tone in Japan, towards the end of my trip, and he told me, I haven't traveled for like the last year. It's like my first foreign trip. So I think he's kind of slowed down a little bit. Apparently he has a girlfriend. Maybe he'll start a family. I don't know. But yeah, it is something that I've wanted to do since I was last single, right? So before I met my wife, I did a 3-week backpacking trip across Australia, and I literally met her at the wedding that I came back to the States for. So it's been like 18 years of waiting to go traveling and backpacking, and I finally got to do it. So in that sense, I was traveling before Tone. Yeah.
Can you I've been reading a little bit just about gold bugs and the impression that, basically through price suppression, that the price could be maybe 50% higher. And so when I think about it from that perspective, there's less monetary premium in gold than, or there's really not much more monetary premium in gold than I thought. So can you talk a little bit about rehypothecation? We've got BlackRock, we've got all these groups coming in. If that's the case with gold, then it doesn't seem like we really have a whole lot to fear from rehypothecation if it's only a 50% premium for gold.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is the fact that gold depositories practice fractional reserve banking, right? They lend out gold that doesn't exist. And this is the original problem with fiat money. They lent out gold that didn't exist, and therefore they had to either suspend convertibility or eventually just cut convertibility altogether. And gold depositories still do that today, right? The London Gold Depository has what they call unallocated gold. This is gold that does not have a serial number that they sell to the market. And you can redeem it if you want to, but why would you want to? It's going to cost you a lot of money to get the gold delivery and so on. So there's a lot of sort of paper gold out there. And you can always tell because it's always in the form of loans. You get a loan for gold that doesn't exist that expands the supply. And with respect to Bitcoin, the thing that we have to fear here is that too many people keep it on custodial services. This is why we say, not your keys, not your coins. If you have it with a custodian and they fractional reserve lend or rehypothecate or something like that, then essentially they're creating paper Bitcoin. And unless you sort of check them by withdrawing your Bitcoin, they're going to be tempted to always kind of do that and make money off of the newly issued paper Bitcoin that they're going to do. So now, as far as like the monetary premium and things like that, I mean, there's sort of like a store of value premium all over the world. Literally every place I went, real estate was going sky high. Every single place, every place in the world. Like, could be Auckland, New Zealand. It could be Da Nang, Vietnam. It could be Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It could be Dubai, whatever. It's everywhere you go, real estate is going up. And this is one of the places where that store of value premium tends to go. Now, the government sort of have an interest in doing that, and we'll see how it survives sort of like the calls for rent controls that are inevitably going to come as inflation kind of goes. But that monetary premium is going to have to go somewhere else. Now, where is it going to go? At least some of it to Bitcoin. I don't know where else it'll go. It's possible it's gold. It's possible it's some other places. But that's the current state of the world right now, is that a significant amount of monetary store of value premium is currently in real estate all over the world.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just add, I think great evidence of how Bitcoin is different is all the failures of financial institutions in the crypto world. Celsius, FTX, BlockFi, Prime Trust. You can only spend Bitcoin once. And when you demand the Bitcoin and ask to withdraw it and you hold it on your own keys, no one can change the supply. We can all validate there are only 21 million Bitcoin. But if you trusted the wrong person and they lent your Bitcoin out and they fail, there's no takebacks. And Bitcoin eliminates moral hazard in that way as well. They just fail. There's no bailouts. No one can print more Bitcoin. The people that trusted the wrong people pay the price. They took the risk, knowingly or not. And because people can demand the actual Bitcoin and it's realistic to both hold and send and spend it, that problem is solved. If it weren't solved, then someone would come along and bail out these firms that failed. And the biggest difference being we can all validate the supply and we can all take physical delivery of Bitcoin, and the people who are swimming naked get exposed. And as soon as they get exposed, there were 150,000 Bitcoin that were deposited into Celsius. Gone. Somebody else has them now. No takebacks. So those fears, I don't think they're overstated. I think they're just misunderstood.
I just wanted to say, Jimmy, I was in Argentina 2 weeks ago, and there was a customer of mine the week before I went who told me that the official rate was 250 and the blue dollar was 425. When I went, the official rate was 250 and the blue dollar was 480. So that was in a week. But the one question I had was about the euro dollar, because that is something that we have no idea how much has been created and how much that affects the markets over there, the economies in Europe and around the world.
Yeah, so for those of you that are not familiar, the euro dollar is basically non-US banks practicing fractional reserve banking with the US dollar. So ever since Bretton Woods, the dollar was supposedly as good as gold. So in that sense, if you had a bunch of dollars in your bank vault, you can lend out against it with the ledger of your bank. And it came to pass historically because the Soviet Union needed supplies from other countries, and they had all these like communist parties all over Europe, and particularly in France. There was a communist party there, basically had their own banking system and all this other stuff. So they got loans from these communist banks basically to lend them dollars because that's what they needed for international settlements and stuff. And so that's where the term sort of euro dollar comes from. But it's not just in Europe anymore. There are Chinese banks that will give out like dollar liabilities, and it's you have no idea if it's backed or not, if it's fractionally reserve lended or whatever. The thing that sort of keeps the euro dollar sort of sane in a way is that you can kind of demand the transfer of those dollars to other parts of the SWIFT network and so on. So if you don't have enough to back it up, then you're bankrupt, and the Fed's not going to bail you out because you're not part of the Federal Reserve System. Although I think in 2008 they did bail out some of these euro dollar banks. So you have this kind of problem, and we don't know where it is. And in that sense, it's not just the Fed that gets to print the money. It's Eurodollar banks can print dollars too. And you have to be very careful, because once you run out of dollars, you really have no recourse. And one of the things you find out, or I found out, like just traveling to a lot of these countries, the countries that experience hyperinflation are almost always countries that have pissed off the United States. And this is sort of like the quid pro quo of the U.S. foreign policy, is that, hey, you do what we say, and we will bail you out when you need it. And this usually takes place in the form of sort of like some liquidity swaps or something like that. So this is why you don't see like Japan, right, or England, or like going through hyperinflation or anything like that. The U.S. is going; they're allies. They're not going to get screwed over, and they will give give more dollars so that they can defend their peg for their currency, so that it doesn't stray too much. The euro dollar is just sort of like one of the many pieces of the puzzle in making all of that work. But it is sort of like a large chunk of money that we don't really know how much of it there is. But I will say, though, that there's some limits on it, because if you do things against the US's interest and do it too much, then you're going to get screwed, and hyperinflation is forthcoming.
Hi. So, I mean, we're here talking about Bitcoin. Of course, there's many different algorithms and ways that one can stake or create a coin. So my question is, what are your thoughts on the on-ramps and the capital expenditures required in order to be a participant in a network? Maybe you have only fiat, you want to get involved, but all of the makers of hardware are going to be it's going to be a bottleneck to get into this this economy, right? And to create the coin. So if you wanted to buy an Antminer, you might go for the second or third or fourth generation back. But then there's this question of they're making it in a country like China, where who knows? They're probably running them for a good 6 months before they sell them to the general public. I mean, we are also looking at a situation with the semiconductor shortages and how that's a very protected thing among governments around the world. What are your thoughts on a proof of work-based monetary system in light of like these hurdles for a regular person who's in the fiat system?
Well, you don't have to go and mine Bitcoin. You can just go do something that you're good at and then earn Bitcoin or earn dollars and convert to Bitcoin. Not everyone has to be a miner. And during the gold standard, a lot of countries didn't have gold mines in their borders. I think France, for example, has 0 gold mines in their borders, but they have one of the largest reserves of gold in the world. Now, how'd that happen? Well, they traded for it. Well, more specifically, they've used the Central African franc, and they've done a lot of fiat games to accumulate that gold from monetary colonialism. But in a sense, it's like you don't have to go and mine Bitcoin to get Bitcoin. In fact, that's not going to be something that you want to do unless you happen to be very good at running a data center and sourcing cheap energy and building large heat dissipation technology or something like that. Like unless you happen to be good at those things, that's not what you should be doing. The thing that you should be doing is using whatever gifts and talents that you might have to best serve society and get paid for it to the measure that you're valued, right? Like, so whatever is going to be the sort of best value for your time and combined with what you enjoy or whatever, you go do that. and that's going to get you the most value, and that's going to earn you the most Bitcoin, not mining. And regarding like where it's being manufactured and stuff, yeah, there are some problems, and this is something that I point out in the book, is that under a fiat monetary system, everything centralizes. Why? Well, as you have inflation, you need to sort of counteract that increase in prices. There is something called the phenomenon of sticky prices, where people don't want to pay more money for the same good. So you can either debase the good and make it worse, which most companies are not. I mean, some do it, but they really don't want to do it. So how else do you make it cheaper? You make it cheaper by scaling up. And if you scale up and scale up and scale up, at a certain point, there's only so much room at the top, and you end up with sort of the situation we have in semiconductors, where you really only have one company that produces high quality chips at a reasonable cost, and that's TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor. And this isn't just for semiconductors. I was doing some research. There's a specialty resin used for automotive manufacturing that is produced by exactly one factory, and it's in Germany. And in 2006, that factory was set on fire. And like auto manufacturing had to stop for a little bit until they repaired that factory, because that was the only place in the world that you could get this specialty resin. This is sort of like the fragility of the fiat system, is that when you have this kind of centralization, all kinds of things get disrupted. We kind of saw this, right? Like just a year and a half ago, we had supply chain problems all over. Why? Well, I mean, there's not just the fact that there's only a few manufacturers of these things, but prices going up and down, and you have contracts where you're obligated to fulfill a certain service or provide a certain good at a cost that you can't afford anymore. It costs you more in materials. And now what are you going to do? You're probably going to like slow walk that contract as much as possible. This is what happened all over the economy. And this is one of the things about fiat money that is incredibly destructive, is that you have insane fragility. You have contracts that don't make sense at a certain point and things like that. And this is what we're trying to fix with a hard sound money, with a money that is much better and that works better, and it doesn't sort of have this implied third party in the Federal Reserve. And that's what the book is about. So hope that answers your question.
All right, let's give him a hand, and then he's got a couple books up here. If you want to buy a copy, he'll PGP sign them. All right, thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Hey guys, whoever did bring people
wait,
here, if you brought more than
we got the raffle, right?
yeah, we got the raffle. So if you brought more than one person, I got an additional 5 tickets for you. So just if you already got some, did anyone bring more than one person?
Remember this for next time. If you bring people, you get 5 extra tickets for the cold card raffle. First timers. We're building the community.
All right, let's do it.
All right, drum roll. How do we do this?
Yeah. 997-387